Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are taking a look at the small unit of stalkers. Okay, so in the tabletop miniature game tied to Starcraft, you can either purchase stalkers as a single model unit, which is the small version, or as a two model unit, which is the larger version. Okay, and this is actually quite powerful. It's quite useful, right? It means that you can have them either supply one or supply two within the purpose of your army. And so they are a little more flexible, be able to fit into stuff at lower points levels or at higher points levels. And there is actually quite a bit of math, as we'll be covering next week, on Tuesday, I believe, regarding whether you should be taking one or two in a squad. But today we're going to be reviewing just the single stalker all on its own, what you get for that, how effective it is, and how powerful you can make it within the game. We're going to do this in a couple ways, as we do in the series. We're going to be looking at resource management, their offensive, defensive, and utility capabilities. We'll look at the ability to hold and take objectives, as that is a pretty critical part of the Starcraft tabletop miniatures game. And then from there, we'll be looking at the opportunity cost, how it stacks up, whether it's a good use of points, which upgrades may be worthwhile and which ones are not, although we'll be talking about those more extensively when we do our paint through videos, as we kind of talk through strategy on using specific elements and how you can utilize those. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about target prioritization, how you can get the most out of the stalkers that you field. And so to start off with, when we look at resource management, it's pretty good. On average, I would expect to use around two psionic energy. Could be a little bit more than that. In the movement phase, you might end up using up to two of your abilities, in that you might end up using Path of Shadows, and you might also end up using Blink. Path of Shadows being an any phase ability, you can technically use it all over the place. And it can be useful. It's just that, again, it's a potential psionic energy point sink, right? Where you might be spending stuff. In the assault phase, again, you could be using Path of Shadows. It's possible. And of course, this doesn't include cards like the Warp Prism that we talked about on Tuesday, where you might end up tapping that as a means of doing additional phase actions, right? We aren't even talking about additional tactical cards, just your use of psionic energy. There's a very good chance you're going to be using Blink on a given turn for a lot of reasons, but there's also a pretty good reason that you might be using Path of Shadows. And so I think, again, assuming that you take that upgrade, you're probably going to be coming in at round two. Okay, because they're both very effective, very efficient for what it is that they're designed to do. The big thing to remember about Path of Shadows, in case you're newer to the game, is that you gain the hidden status until you perform another action, which means in the assault phase, if you're not planning on being assaulted or attacked by somebody, you can, after performing your attacks, then do Path of Shadows, gain hidden, and now not only do people have to be within 4 inches of you to shoot at you unless they happen to have a detector nearby, which you would know before using Path of Shadows in this way. So you can decide whether you want that or not. But it also means that if people wanted to charge you for whatever reason, maybe you've already taken your shot, you did it early on, and so then you end up using Path of Shadows after. If they want to charge you, they can from any distance, but they don't get their impact hits, which is a whole lot of potential wounds that you ignore. So Path of Shadows being relatively inexpensive it's a pretty okay ability, right? You can take it, you can pass on it. It all depends on what else it is that you want to run and how much gas you want to be spending on psionic energy to field these guys in mass. But on the whole, not bad, right? It's not particularly gas intensive. It's not going to be particularly energy intensive. It's going to work out okay for you. Now, offensively, they're pretty average when there's only one of them, right? Obviously, next week when we talk about the large Stalker squad, this number's going to change, right? Because there's going to be twice as many models in it. But in the movement phase, your goal is kind of to maneuver to about 11 inches away, right? The thing to keep in mind is you may want to come a little bit closer in case there are, say, Terran medics around who can reduce your range with an optical flare, things like that. You may want to plan around that. But the nice thing about 11 is you're in range to shoot, but it's not an easy charge either, right? A lot of people are going to be needing fives or sixes in order to charge into you, which even if they get to roll two dice and take the higher one, not a great chance they're going to get that. They might, or they might not, right? And that's a really good thing, right? Because the Stalker, as you can see there in the combat phase stuff, the attacks are not good, okay? Like it's better than the medic. If you take the larger squad, but here with the smaller squad, it's actually worse than the medics. Because medics, assuming that you still have all three of them, they're getting 3 attacks at a 5+ to hit, no surges, 1 damage. You're only getting 2. So they're actually better than you. The only saving grace that stalkers have is that they're a Protoss unit, which means there's a very high likelihood you have a gateway. So you can turn two misses into hits if you really, really want to, right? Like we talked about on Tuesday when it came to the tactical cards, right? So like is pretty bad. Where you want to be doing is you want to be doing stuff in the assault phase, right? You really want to be shooting at stuff. That's what you want to do, and ideally not be charged in return. And so you can see there with the particle disruptors, you're getting 4 attacks on a 3 plus, surge armor D3. So on average, two of your hits are going to bypass the armor save and go straight to an evade save if they have one, which, especially for armored targets, they don't tend to have as good of those as other units tend to have, and it does 2 damage with every single hit. So, even if you're shooting at Zerglings, which only have 1 wound, if you do one successful hit against them that isn't blocked, you're going to be removing 2 Zerglings, right? And if you can sneak in 2 or 3 of them, then even more than those, right? The other benefit too is that if you do end up taking Fury of the Nerazim, which will reproduce down below as a potential upgrade, you'll notice that you gain the instant special rule as long as you're attacking an enemy unit that is already activated. Which means, and this is the nice thing about instant, we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday, but it's worth repeating here. When you have the instant keyword applied to an attack, the opponent can't use reactions. So if their plan to keep a unit alive was a queen transfusing on the Zerglings in order to keep them alive, no transfusion. So whatever damage goes through, which is really important. It means that if any number of Terran bio units were trying to be kept alive by a medic, a quick medic save, right? A bunch of wounds being blocked because the medics are there. There's no chance for the medics to use their attack. Well, to use their reaction. It means that if their plan was to use a tough one or something else like that from a forge or engineering bay or something else like that, some sort of card that's designed to help block some wounds, they can't do that. If they were intending to use a guardian shell or the Daylom faction card for the Protoss, neither of those can be used. This means that your damage becomes a lot more reliable. It means that anything that still is getting an evade save that's any good will probably still do okay against you. And that's just something to think about, right? And something to be maybe a little bit concerned about. But just on the whole, it means that the attack becomes a little more reliable. So I tend to like having Fury of the Nerazim. I actually kind of like it more than I like Path of Shadows because Fury of the Nerazim is a passive. You don't have to pay any energy for this. It's completely free. It always applies. Now, admittedly, you have to be attacking a unit that's already activated during this phase. So you can't lead off with this Stalker. But then again, it's only one Stalker, right? There's probably a more important charge with Zealots or a more important shot with Adepts or a more important shot with a larger squad of Stalkers than there is just a single 4-die attack as your lead off attack, right? So just in general, I tend to find it works out okay as the leading thing. And you'll notice here, from a damage perspective, like it's fine, right? If we assume Fury of the Nerazim or a Nexus, in the event that you want instant, right? We're going to assume instant on this. So that way the damage is a little more reliable. Then on average, you're getting about 3 hits, maybe a fourth one if there's an Adept Shade within 4 inches of the target that you're shooting at, because then that gives you precision once. You can fix one miss into a hit. On average, then you're going to be getting about 3 to 4 hits out of your 4 attacks, which is really, really good. And then with your Surge getting through 2 and 2 damage per hit, you'll notice that means that assuming about 3 hits or so, against light targets, you're going to be getting 1 block, 2 through, which is 4 damage. And then, assuming 3 hits, with your Surge, sending 2 of them past the armor save, you're probably getting at least 2 hits, which becomes 4 wounds, possibly a third one. Because, of course, with armored targets, you're looking at around a 4+ armor save most of the time, could be a 3+. So they may pass the one that they get to roll for, or they may not. But at the very least, you're getting 2 of them through. So your baseline is going to be at least 4. Can be as high as 6. I'm going with 6 only because if you get the shade aspect of it, your math might be slightly higher than this. Okay? And so because of that, I'm willing to push it into average instead of leaving it in poor. But you'll notice there, you're doing on average no damage really in close combat. Okay? And this is very important. Unless you factor in a gateway that can convert 2 misses into hits, your assumption with a Stalker, a single lone Stalker in close combat, should be no hits, which means probably no wounds. You might get 1, okay? But then you're doing 1 damage, right? The chances that if a Zergling unit gets into you, congratulations, you might remove a Zergling. There's a very good chance they're going to remove one Stalker, and that's not a good trade at all. So, in general, offensively, I think they're fine. I don't think that it's great running them single, and I really appreciate that. Cold Fury, uh, another channel that does a lot of StarCraft stuff and does some math, which is really great, did make a note that there is one benefit that the small stalker squad has over the large stalker, which is that taking two small stalker squads allows you to surge twice against armored targets, which means you can bypass armor more commonly. And that is true. One thing that I want you to notice about this, though, and this is important, we'll talk about this more in the opportunity cost section and even more so on Tuesday, so I don't want to get too deep into it now. But one thing just to note here is the numbers. If you're only going to get about 4 to 6 hits in against a squad, and that assumes that, against an armored target, and that assumes that they don't have an evade save. So a burrowed roach unit, for example, that can get a 5+ evade, possibly a 4+ evade if they're part of Zerg Swarm and they decide to use their faction card to improve an evade save by a +1. You might get less than this, for the record. But even then, you're popping one roach, which is not enough to remove supply. If they roll slightly above average, it might be less than one roach, at which point they might regenerate and heal, and you might end up resetting all of your work. So it's a little bit tricky, right? I just want to be honest about this. Whereas if you have twice as many shots and you're getting in, even if they get to roll for a bunch of their stuff, you're still probably getting in more damage, which means the chances you actually remove a roach, if not two roaches, is actually a lot higher. This becomes even more true with things like Marauders, Goliaths, and things that have more than 4 wounds to them. Because it means if you're trying to shoot at a Marauder squad in order to reduce the damage coming back into you, because they're very good against armored targets, unsurprisingly, you may not remove a Marauder. And then that Marauder might shoot back at you, and they might, depending on how many of them are and how well they roll and whether they Stimpact or not, they might remove you. So the one issue that the single stalker has is that if you could line up both of them activating back to back, if the Kalai faction card was not specific to the movement phase with Bound by the Kala, if you could use that in any phase, then I would agree. And I think that's probably true. I think there's a place for both. The biggest issue that the single stalker has is that it does assume that you're going to be able to get in both units attacking. And that, for example, a large squad of Marauders isn't like, okay, well, I'm activating second, but they've got two split units of Stalkers. They're going to shoot at me with one of them, and then I'm going to shoot at the other one. And we're going to remove the other one before they even get a chance to shoot at us. And what ends up happening is you may not even remove a single Marauder. And they may remove one of your two Stalkers, and then the next turn they're just going to clean up the other one. Okay, maybe you remove one of them. They're totally fine with that kind of math. Okay, so the one issue with the single one is volume. Volume is not particularly good. Again, more on that on Tuesday. When looking at defensive abilities, they're pretty okay, right? You got a 4+ armor save, which is fine. Again, that's the lower end when it comes to armored targets, but it's perfectly serviceable, right? You're blocking half the wounds that come into you. It's perfectly fine. The evade save is not going to help much, and it doesn't come up very much. Okay, so you can get the evade save if you have the hidden property, which is nice. And of course, with Path of Shadows, you do have the way to get the hidden status, which is nice. I think the better way of thinking about hidden is that it's potentially a way to avoid attacks entirely, right? Because if your opponent has activated a bunch of their stuff in the movement phase, especially, and they've maneuvered so that way they're, just barely within 8 inches, so that way they can get their bonuses for being within 8 inches of target. A lot of units do. They've maneuvered in such a way, and then you suddenly go hidden after they've already activated. They may not have the ability to shoot at you in a given turn unless they can drop a detector, which also means it's a really great idea to activate Stalkers like this and then Path of Shadows after your opponent has already passed. And they're like, hey, I'm going to get to shoot first in the assault phase, or I'm going to get to charge first in the assault phase. And then you go hidden. And the unit that they were planning on shooting at you with is now not able to hit you. Probably doesn't want to charge you if it's a shooting unit, or if they are a charging unit, assuming they even make it into charge radius, there's a very good chance that they're not going to get their impact hits, right? And so that's the big advantage, right, that you end up with this. But the evade save, it's going to hardly do anything, right? It's not really going to do anything for you in a game. Then you got your wounds. Wounds of 9, 6 standard hit points, which can be healed if you take the Twilight Council. 3 shields is pretty reasonable, right? For a single model, that's not horrible, right? It's on par with the Queen. Slightly worse than the Queen because if you run multiple Queens, Queens can transfuse each other and they can transfuse all of those wounds because all those wounds are hit points, right? Whereas this one, even if you have Twilight Council, which is a unique card, so you can't Twilight Council a whole lot of Stalkers, it does limit you because you can't regain shields that way. Now, eventually, when Karak the Phase Smith drops, maybe we'll see ways to regain shields. If we end up ever getting like a shield battery tactical card, we might end up seeing the ability to regain shields in that way, but at least at present, don't really have that option. So that's just a thing to think about. But it's still perfectly fine, right? Your size 3 means you do get pretty limited cover. It also means people get limited cover against you. Because if they were size 2, being like, oh, I'm going to hide behind this size 2 piece of terrain, you're size 3, you look over it, they don't get the benefit of cover from you, right? Which is kind of nice. And then with your special rule, Path of Shadows, again, you can kind of block some of the wounds coming in at you. And with Blink, it does allow you to escape things better. Another thing worth noting is that a lot of the movement-based tactical cards require the unit to be unengaged. Notice that Blink just says resolve the play 6 effect. This means that if you've been engaged by an enemy unit, say a bunch of Zerglings with shredding claws, and you're like, okay, well, we weathered the first storm, we took a beating, we really don't want more of that. You can activate this unit and you can blink, pay your 1 psionic energy, blink, move the unit that was engaged in close combat up to 6 inches away, then place the other one in cohesion another 4 inches away. And then you could do your standard move of 4 inches for the further model if you really need to, right? And then another 4 inches in unit coherency for the other one, just to really kind of get some extra distance. And keep in mind, the Zerglings probably haven't activated yet, so be prepared. Unless they've already passed, there's a very good chance they're going to try to follow. So don't just go like 11 inches away because they're going to maneuver like 9 inches closer to you, okay? But the result is that, yeah, like you have the ability to be able to easily get out of scrapes, take advantage of terrain better, which is also really good. So, like, yeah, it's just a really, really efficient, effective way of doing good defense by just ignoring, hopefully, some of the danger that people present to you. They're reasonably durable for the amount you're paying. Obviously, they're going to get a whole lot more durable when we double the number of hit points in next week's video. Okay, Twilight Council again, very helpful whenever you perform a place action, which could be a Warp Prism, could be Blink. You can resolve a Heal 2 effect. Note it is only going to be 1, so if you do Blink, tap the Twilight Council, and then you Warp Prism, you aren't able to heal a second time. It's not every time this turn that you perform a place action you heal 2. It's just the once. That being said, it's a heal 2. Protoss don't get healing currently, so I would take it. it's fine. And you can see from the breakdown here how many hits somebody doing damage 1 or damage 2 with or without the surge need to do to you. The only important thing you need to know from this chart is that this is why you need to be careful of both enemy large stalker squads, because an enemy large stalker squad can remove you in a single go, which can be quite dangerous. But also, in addition to that, marauders are not far off. Okay, and so just be careful. Also, by the way, the math gets a little weird when you start getting to things like damage 3. So if you look at Goliath Haywire missiles or Jim Raynor's commando rifle, like he'd have either of these would have to roll pretty well in order to get rid of you with that single attack. But they technically can. If they hit with all of their attacks and you don't block any of them because they do surge against you. So, if you don't end up blocking any of them with armor saves, each of those is Pierce Armor 3, so every hit does 3 damage. You could go from full health, full shields to gone in a single activation. Okay? So be careful. That is something, by the way, that the large squad doesn't really have to worry about. They have to worry about it a little bit, but not nearly as much because they have 2 models, right? And so you can't be completely polished off in a single activation like that. Now, when looking at your utility abilities, that's actually pretty good, right? I mean, you have a speed of 8, which is phenomenally good because the slash in the speed category, showing 4/8, indicates that when you have multiple models, they move the 4, and then the other one unit coheres to the extra in this case 4 inches, which is why it's 8 instead of 7. But when you're down to one model, you get the full 8 inches because it effectively means you could take advantage of the unit cohesion extra movement, even though you're down to a single model, which I appreciate. That's really good game design. It means you're not dramatically slower by virtue of the fact that you went from multiple models to a single model. Especially since single models are already being treated as a little bit faster on account of the fact that they don't have unit cohesion to work with. The supply one does mean that you can help to control objectives. It's not like great for controlling objectives, but you can control it, right? And you can keep the opponent from taking command of it, which is always really nice. It also means it's very easy to fit around the rest of your army, right? So if you're playing at lower points levels, you might only have 3 or 4 starting supply, and you might want your stalker out early to help deal with potential big threats. If that's the case, the fact that it's only one supply means you can run it with literally anything else, right? You could have a squad of zealots and a stalker, and that could be your starting supply of 3, right? If you have supply of 4, you could run a squad of zealots and 2 stalkers if you really wanted to, right? You could go crazy and run 2 stalkers and 2 squads of adepts, and that would give you your supply of 4, right? Or whatever. It makes it very easy to work these around the rest of your army, which is great. Obviously, in standard level, because of the fact that you're getting 2 supply every single turn and you start with 6 to 8, it's not nearly as much of a question, but it still is a question because you might want multiple adept squads shading out to get to other far places of the battlefield. You might want stalkers to go out to different places. You might want some zealots just for camping in an objective, maybe with a warp gate, so you can bring it into a place your opponent thought was pretty safe and is relatively close to the opponent, so that way you can get into charging a lot easier. There's just a lot of things why having a 1 supply stalker might be useful. It is also on an 80 millimeter base, which means if you're within range of an objective, zoning people out is quite easy to do because you're taking up a good bit of space, right? This is something that those, the 40 mil bases that Protoss tend to get, they cannot do quite as well because, you know, they're only half the size and only a quarter of the surface area, right? More or less, right? Because we're talking circles, not squares. But you get the idea, right? Like if you can just plunk down an 80 millimeter base on the far side of the objective, your opponent has to work a whole good way around in order to get to it. And even if they do end up getting within touching range to score, the chance that they outsupply you on it is pretty unlikely, especially if you're a stalker and you're doing damage and you're helping to remove models as you're going along. And then finally, again, Blink being able to just disengage with no penalties each turn is really, really nice. It makes it so that people have a lot of trouble holding you down. If you want to get somewhere, you totally can. It also means, and this is a critical thing, in case, let's say, you've overrun an objective and they've got like 2 Zerglings that charged into you, and so they're holding you there, right? And you're like, actually, that's a bad example because you could always disengage with no penalty for doing that. But, let's say that you're like, okay, well, like, I don't want to disengage because I'd really prefer to be fighting on another side of the battlefield. So you're like, okay, well, maybe I just Nexus myself away with a strategic recall. Well, the problem is strategic recall requires you to be unengaged. And you do that instead of performing a normal action, which means if you choose to disengage, you can't strategic recall. But with Blink, because you can do your active abilities before or after your standard action, you can blink, active, jump if you needed to, Twilight Council, heal too, and then you can strategic recall because now you are not engaged, right? And so now, whoop, they thought they held down your stalker. They have not held down your stalker. And then with a different unit, you place out a token somewhere else, or you already have a token out somewhere else. And at the end of the turn, stalker appears over there. You don't even have to worry about bringing it on the next turn. He's right where you need him. And the opponent's just like, stupid Protoss. Movement shenanigans. Movement and redeployment shenanigans are something the Protoss do really, really well. It's something currently they're almost unique in doing oh so very well. And I love that. And it means that, yeah, even though it's not like a dedicated support unit, it does a lot of support stuff relatively well. Now, when looking at objective holding, it's pretty good, mostly because, the fact that it's armored, so less things in the game currently are surging against it. It's got a 4+ armor, which means, it's blocking on average half the hits coming in it. You can't really ask too much more because the 3+ club is relatively coveted. 6+ evade is whatever. I didn't really give it any points for that. And it does have 9 HP, which is not horrible, right? When you factor in the shields. That's a good starting baseline. If that was all it had, it would not be a horrible defender. Okay, it has a supply of 1, which means it can help to protect against like a small band. Against a dedicated push from the opponent, that could be really, really bad. But if it's just like a smaller unit, it can probably trade evenly on its own. It's going to be fine. And the fact that the opponent has to remove all 9 wounds on this unit, possibly more if you're blinking to heal, in order to remove your supply, is really, really good for maintaining that parity against a single enemy unit, maybe two if one of them is a support unit. With an attack range of 12 inches with access to a range of 16 off of the Twilight Council, which is not long range, it means you're a really, really good deterrent against people moving in on your position. You can winnow them down from a good distance. You have a little bit of room to be able to skirmish with them before you absolutely have to abandon the objective or just make a stand and try to hold it for as long as possible, which means your opponent really has to think twice. And the things you generally want to send onto objectives to kind of push the enemy off of them are things like armored units. They actually really have to be concerned about stalkers. Because Stalkers, especially with Forge access, getting critical hit 1, so that you're surging through yet another dice effectively, but it isn't Surge. So it works against anything, and it's not something that you can easily get rid of by simply saying, haha, get rid of some of your Surge dice. This is a really powerful way to be able to kind of deter and keep something under your control. Your damage output is fine. It is better against armor, but again, like the biggest issue is volume. That's what keeps it back a bit. More on this next week. But just suffice it to say, like, yeah, it's good, right? It can hold an objective. You might consider accompanying it with another unit. I've found that I really like putting like an adept unit in the area, so that way if I need somebody to zone out for them, I can maneuver the adepts in place. The adepts are better in close combat, so I would personally prefer that they get hit. It also means I can easily send shades out close to where the opposing units are so that I can trigger that precision 1 better from all of our ranged attacks. But just in general, if you have to hold an objective and all you have is a stalker on hand, it's not the worst thing ever. Now, when looking at objective taking potential, it's actually really good. First of all, it's extremely fast, especially if you use the Blink Warp Prism combo. 17-inch move, which is phenomenally good. Okay, which means that an opponent's objective that they thought was going to be pretty safe, and they could guard with just like a tiny little unit of, a sentry unit or something else like that, something small that doesn't really need to, it's not really planning on doing all that much for people, a battered marine unit, you can get over there and then start causing trouble. And now they got to start shifting whole groups of people over to meet the needs of your relatively inexpensive single stalker. Supply 1 means you can technically challenge objectives. You're probably going to need some help because they probably have at least 1 supply holding that objective, maybe more. And your ability to remove a whole lot of supply is relatively limited, especially if there are multiple units nearby. Your attack range of 12 to 16 inches means that you can do pretty reasonable removal. You can even pound for a little bit and siege for a little bit before you move in. And again, moving in is very easy because blink, which is really nice. Your damage output in general is fine. It's especially good in case they're relying on kind of lighter targets to defend, because damage 2 means you're probably more likely to be removing models a little more quickly. And in some cases, some of those light units are really relying on their model count, Marines and Zerglings especially. Eventually, when we end up getting like Infested Terran and Infested Marines, I imagine it'll be a very similar story, where they really are going to be relying on mass numbers in order to really get the value. And then finally, from a resilience standpoint, like again, they're pretty fine, right? They're an armored target, 4+, 9 wounds. That's a good start, right? You are very likely to survive pushing up against and onto an objective, especially if you have other guys helping you out. And so when looking at the final rating, I mean it's pretty fine, right? I mean it's good. It's technically on the average side of good, right? But I mean it's pretty good, right? You can be reasonably tough. You can do pretty good damage if you're fighting the right kinds of units, and if you can get your hits to actually hit. Okay. Uh, be extremely careful of vile roaches, because vile roaches will lure you in, especially if they burrow themselves. So you feel like, okay, I gotta either drop an observer, or if I didn't take an observer, I gotta move in close. And then what's gonna happen is you're gonna get ready to attack, and they're gonna say, oh, hit -1, bleh. And then you're gonna be hitting on 4s instead of hitting on 3s, and you don't have that easy access to precision, which means you might only hit with like 2. And that does assume an average roll, right? At which point then, if they get an evade save, you may not be removing an entire roach, and you might find to heal the 2 that you end up doing to them, and you end up doing a net value of nothing, okay? More on this again on Tuesday as to what it is that you actually need this to do, because I feel like to some extent, The small stalker kind of fills a different role. It's not designed to go after the, okay, so where are all the really big armored units? Where's the healthy armored units that are on the table? It's more of a precision striker sort of unit, almost a sniper. Okay, not quite as good at sniping as the sentries are, ironically, but it is pretty reasonable at that. When you start at 170 points, it's not that expensive either. And since both of your upgrades only cost 20 points each, you can keep this sub 200 very easily, which means it's a relatively expensive one supply. A lot of people can get one supply for around that cost or lower, but it's not horrible, okay, as regards the cost. Between the two, I tend to favor, as I mentioned earlier, Fear of the Nerazim over Path of Shadows, only because one, Path of Shadows is extremely psionic energy intensive, especially if you're running a lot of single stalker squads. If you're only running one, you tell yourself, okay, well, here's my observer. If I don't need it in a given game, then that's my Path of Shadows thing, right? And that's fine. But if you have four of these running around and you need to spend a psionic energy every single time, that could be all of your psionic energy just spent on Path of Shadows. That means there's no blink. It means that you're not helping any other unit that you have in your force, right? Admittedly, if you have four of these, you don't have very many other units in your force, right? So there's that. But you get the point, right? Like this could be quite difficult, right? To really kind of make work if you have to pay every single time. Whereas Fury of the Nerazim is a passive, right? It doesn't cost you any extra psionic energy every single turn. You just get it. And the only rule is activate something else first, or your opponent let off, in which case they activated a unit, and now you get to activate a unit, and you go after that activated unit, and suddenly Fury of the Nerazim, instant, no healing, no wound blocking. All of which is good. And so just on the whole, I think it's great. You know, if you're looking at running these, I think that they're perfectly good. And when looking at what you should prioritize, I think you should go after the small armored units. Okay? Go after units where you have a good chance of removing one model. Okay? So maybe let a bigger squad of stalkers pound away at a Goliath first, and then finish off with a small stalker squad. Okay? Because one, you wouldn't want to send a whole bunch of other attacks. You don't want to have to charge a bunch of zealots in for something that only has like 2, 3 wounds left, right? Or something like that. If something only has like 4 wounds left, that's a great opportunity for a small stalker squad. Okay. But we want to make sure we're reducing the effectiveness of what the opponent is doing, if at all possible, when we take this activation. And the simple reason why is because if we shoot at something and we don't really do anything, and it shoots back at us, they might actually do something. And that could be really bad because we only have the one model. Okay. And then when we look at small light units, this can also be a really good option, right? So you don't technically get the surge, but the damage 2 combined with a low armor save makes you quite effective, right? If you get 3 hits in against a Zergling squad, there's a very good chance they don't block any of those with armor because it's a 6 plus, right? And they don't have a really great chance of getting at least 1 6, which means you might remove 6 Zerglings with a single shot. That's one supply. I guess unless you're going against Swarmlings. Swarmlings, it's not going to be quite one supply because they don't drop to one supply until they. Oh no, yeah. Because they start at one supply. They don't drop to 0, I think, until you're down to 6. So, but in general, you can at least drop things by one supply. You're removing a bunch of attacks. You go up against Marines, right? If you get 3 hits and they block one of them, so now you're down to 2 of those going through. That's 4 wounds, which is 2 Marines. But it might also be stim pack, which means you might get a third Marine. A third Marine is a drop in supply. And if it's instant, there's no medic save, right? Chance they get an evade save is extremely low. If they do get one, they're maybe blocking one more, right? Which means you're still removing a couple of Marines. That's not horrible, right? So the smaller, lighter squads, also not a bad idea, right? And then finally, from a positioning standpoint, my encouragement is don't be blinking all the time. Okay. Obviously, if you need to heal, that's one thing. If you need a better or safer position, if you're in trouble, by all means blink. But save the psionic energy. If you're tapping a forge in order to blink, that forge could have been sneaking another hit and thus 2 wounds past an armor save. It could have been blocking a hit that could be a Pierce Armor 3, which could be the difference between you living and dying. So ask the question, is it worth it to actually blink this turn? Do I have to? If it means getting to an objective first and claiming an objective, that's one thing. Okay. If, however, you're just blinking because, oh, hey, I'm a stalker, I should probably be blinking. That's what I paid points for. You might have just been paying points for like a quick round one or round two blink so that you can get to where you want to be, and then you deny your opponent victory points for the rest of the game. That might be sufficient, right? It's a good investment. And so when looking at tactical cards, again, the Twilight Council, fantastic. Forge is fantastic. Things like the Warp Prism and the Nexus are also really good shouts, right? There's a lot of cards you can get that can work really well with Stalkers, right? Even the Chrono Boosted Gateway, which I don't talk about very positively all that often because I just think it's a worse version of the Warp Gate without giving dramatically better options, even though it only costs 5 gas less. Technically, speed 2 on this is fantastic, right? If you can tap it, being able to move 10 inches means you may not need to blink. I still feel like if you're going to be tapping the Chrono Boosted Gateway, so you're basically spending one psionic energy, you might as well move, tap the Chrono Boosted Gateway, and blink. That's my issue, right? And the reason why I don't think that the move speed, that the buff speed 2 is actually very worthwhile. On stalkers, right? I don't think they work particularly well with that. But yeah, just in general, I tend to think single stalker, it's good. Right, the Stalker is good in many respects. It's one of the best units so far in the game. Some people have even argued maybe it's a little OP as it currently stands. We'll talk about this a little bit more on Tuesday when we talk about the single versus double Stalker squad sizes. But the one thing you need to know is the moment the Immortal, the Siege Tank, and possibly the Ravager arrive, I don't think the Stalker is going to be nearly as powerful as it is. So I think we're in kind of a weird Goldilocks zone right now where, yeah, when you're playing with your Stalkers, you might find they're rolling the table. And if your opponents are getting frustrated, just wait until wave two. Wave two, you're going to find, I suspect, and I say this with the knowledge that like I'm trying not to talk about the lead cards. We're just going to focus on what's officially out there. Just from the article that we got talking about the 3 units that are going to be dropping for wave two, I think the Stalker's going to have things that can handle it and handle it quite well. But more on that in a future video. But what do you think? Was I perhaps maybe a little too unfair to say the damage output of the single Stalker? Is the single Stalker actually quite non-resilient? And in your mind, you're a little bit surprised when I tell you, hey, it's something you can park there and it can hold for a little bit against, a small enemy push. Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.